The waters of our world are striking. They cover nearly 2/3 of the Earth and hold some of the most beautiful and diverse environments on the planet. They hold a unique beauty, one that can be found both in the endless span of white-capped waves in the open ocean and in the bright blue waters and vibrant reefs of the tropics. There is something almost mesmerizing about them, in the rippling of waves from horizon to horizon, in the sense of warmth that's carried by bright colors and clear waters that has always made me think of summer. But the warm, crystal-clear waters of the shallows are a small sliver of the totality of the ocean. They are a fleeting light in the alien and overwhelmingly dark world of the submerged. For every nautical mile of bright and vibrant coral reefs that are teeming with life, there are hundreds more of nothing but pitch blackness that creeps up from the ocean's deepest parts. The ocean could not be more different than our realm on the surface, where we build our homes and our cities, where we can grow our food and our technology works. We can't survive in the ocean, not for long anyway, and unaided we are helpless in water, more so than anywhere else. The ocean, for much of human history, has been a dangerous obstacle, a world of unknowns and hidden dangers, the realm of fickle gods and colossal monsters alike that doomed sailors who slighted them or happened to sail too close. While it is true that over time the world has gotten smaller, its oceans a little less treacherous thanks to human progress, the ocean is still something we have yet to truly master. The countless shipwrecks dotting the sea floor are proof enough of that. The wonders of our world are its last great unknown, veiled in darkness and immense pressures, and inhabited by life that is otherworldly. It is somewhere I can't help but find completely terrifying. This fear is thalassophobia, the fear of deep and large bodies of water. It's not a fear of water itself, like aquaphobia, and it's not just limited to the ocean either, even if that's where it's most associated with. Thalassophobia, like many fears, can be vague or hard to define. It's not caused by any one clear aspect of the deep, and it may range from vague sensations of unease to severe feelings of fear. Feelings which may be most intense when in or near water, or might just as easily be pushed out of mind when distracted by the fun of a day at the beach or a swim in a lake, only really becoming noticeable when you have time to dwell on them, spawning that feeling of being watched from beneath the surface, that phantom sensation of something brushing against your leg, that passing thought that you're not as alone in the water as it may seem. I don't have thalassophobia, at least I don't think I do. Looking at images of the deep, or even being in the ocean itself, doesn't fill me with severe feelings of fear or dread. But the ocean and the deep do unsettle me. Images like this do make me uneasy, and it's an uneasiness that builds the longer I look. I know that logically, what I'm looking at is just water. It's empty, but I still can't fully silence that part of my brain that's screaming out of the danger hidden away in the murk, unseen and watching through the darkness. It's a warning of some potential danger that just doesn't exist. Not in this image, anyway. Fear of the ocean and really deep water in general is one of humanity's oldest fears. There are endless tales of the power and unpredictability of the sea, mythological stories warning of great and horrible monsters hidden beneath the churning waves, lurking in wait to pull unaware ships down to their doom, or others telling of the sea itself coming alive as an avatar of an angry sea god to swallow entire cities or civilizations in a single moment of divine fury. The name Atlantis is probably familiar to you. It's one of the most well-known stories here in the Western world, after all. It was written by the Greek philosopher Plato in the 4th century BCE, and to summarize as briefly as possible, the Atlanteans were punished by the gods for their decadence and moral corruption. Their cities crumbled to dust and their island was pulled into the ocean by Poseidon. The story of Atlantis is fictional, a vehicle for Plato to give shape to his ideal society, and in the story itself, the catastrophe of the Atlanteans is a footnote. The story is not concerned with the horror of Atlantis being dragged into the abyss. Instead, it offers an explanation. For the Greek, Plato and the rest of the peoples living along the coast of the ancient Mediterranean, drowned cities were perhaps not an everyday occurrence, but were a simple fact of life nonetheless. The number of flooded ruins from the Mediterranean coast of Spain to Greece and then to Egypt show that much. There is even today a persistent danger of living along the coasts. The possibility of the ocean surging forth and flooding or even swallowing coastal settlements is one that has never really gone away. and within our lifetimes, countless others will likely be added to the list of places claimed by the waters of the Mediterranean. The ocean can be chaotic and seemingly unpredictable. Oceanic earthquakes are undetectable until they have already started, and their effects can ripple out over thousands of miles, being carried on waves traveling hundreds of miles an hour in open water until they crash down on distant shorelines. The thought of encountering nearly supersonic waves out in the open ocean is horrifying, but fortunately these waves are least dangerous when out in deep water. The same cannot be said for rogue waves. Rogue waves are especially terrifying. They can tower over the surrounding waters until they peak and are almost completely invisible in deep water, passing unseen beneath the surface until they suddenly manifest, sometimes reaching heights close to 100 feet above the sea surface. And for ships or sea platforms that end up in their path, these titanic waves seem to come out of nowhere, erupting out of normal seas to suddenly crash down upon them. This is the Great Wave off Kanagawa. It is one of the most famous pieces of Japanese art, and it was painted by Katsushika Hokusai in the 1820s, as part of his 36 Views of Mount Fuji. The scene that it is depicting is a harrowing one, showing several fishing boats caught up in rough seas, with a massive wave cresting over nearly the entire length of one boat like a hand closing into a fist, ready to ensnare it and pull its crew down into the deep. The waves in the foreground tower far above anything else in the work, their white-capped peaks dwarfing even Mount Fuji in the distance. Until recently it was believed that the Great Wave represented a tsunami, but recently it has been suggested that instead Hokusai's aim was to depict a rogue wave. The Great Wave is not capturing any single event or disaster. Instead, it is speaking on the raw power of nature and human determination. People in their ships are small and fragile. The waves are titanic and overwhelming, yet the fishermen brave the danger regardless. It is unsurprising that Hokusai, as a man living in Japan during the 19th century, would have a respect for the power of the ocean. The scene captured in the Great Wave is one that could only be drawn up by somebody from an island nation, someone for whom the sea and the potential danger it can bring is an unavoidable part of everyday life, where the specter of seaborne disaster lingers ever overhead, which can bring not only immense loss of life, but even completely redraw the shoreline. On the 7th of June in 1692, the city of Port Royal in British Jamaica was hit by a colossal 7.2 magnitude earthquake. A series of intense tremors hit the city one after another just before noon, felling buildings and turning the ground into a slurry. Witnesses reported that the ground seemed to liquefy and swallow people and buildings alike. One of these witnesses was Reverend Heath, a Christian minister who was visiting the governor of the city when the tremors first struck. Through his correspondences after the fact, he provides us with a first-hand account of the terrifying nature of the disaster, saying in a letter a few days afterwards, quote, "We heard the church and the tower fall, upon which we ran to save ourselves. I quickly lost him and made towards Morgan's fort, which, being a wide-open place, I thought there to be the securest from the falling houses. But as I made towards it, I saw the earth open and swallow up a multitude of people, and the sea mounting in upon us over the fortifications. I then laid aside all thoughts of escaping." Entire sections of the city slid off into the sea as the shaking liquefied the ground. Over half of Port Royal collapsed into the ocean. Most of the city that avoided being submerged was reduced to rubble otherwise. The shifting of the earth toppled buildings and left hundreds of people half buried in the earth, some with only their heads exposed above ground. Hundreds of people drowned as what was left of Port Royal was then flooded by the subsequent tsunami that crashed down on the settlement not long after the worst of the quaking had stopped. The churning of the earth was so violent that some, like Louis Goldie, were swallowed up by liquid sand only to be shot out into the sea, but most were not so lucky. In less than half an hour, nearly 2,000 people had lost their lives, with further casualties mounting in the following days. The quake and the subsequent tsunami radically changed the shoreline of the area, and nearly 2/3 of the city ended up submerged even after the waters had receded. The drowned ruins of the city and the countless shipwrecks in its harbor are a marker of the tragedy that struck that day. The flooded ruins of Port Royal are uncomfortable to look at, as are other flooded places. A haunting stillness hangs over them. Like shipwrecks, they are a persistent reminder of human fragility in dealing with the ocean. A reminder that despite all our progress and advancements, the waters of our world are somewhere that we have yet to really conquer. The eeriness that permeates photos of the ocean like this is reminiscent of the feeling of walking in a ghost town, though it's not entirely the same. The feeling of surrealness that comes with most abandoned places is rooted in seeing them devoid of people, far removed from their original purposes. Though the ruins of flooded places can also feel surreal, there is a sadness to them as well, like an aftershock of tragedy that lingers through time and has become an intertwined part of these places' identity. Often they are places of incredible suffering, where in some cases thousands of people have experienced their sudden end. 1,500 people died in the sinking of the Titanic. Around 5,000 died as a result of the 1692 earthquake, which saw most of Port Royal collapse into the tropical waters of the Caribbean. Suffering has become a part of these places and things. They are reminders not just of the incredible power of the ocean, but in human fragility as well. Such feelings aren't just limited to man-made structures like sunken ships or flooded ruins. Snapshots of the deep, even of the bare sea floor, can invoke the same kind of feelings, sometimes even more strongly. The sensation is not exactly the same, of course. It doesn't have the same touch of melancholy that comes with viewing the sight of tragedy or loss that images like this might make me feel. Deep seascapes are characterized by great emptiness, the unknowable darkness that creeps in from the periphery. This darkness and the sheer scale of the ocean come together to make it one of the most terrifying places on Earth. Fear of the dark is a common one. It is one that has probably been experienced by most people at least once, especially as children. Fear of the dark is to a large degree the fear of the unknown rather than the darkness itself. It is a lack of information that sprouts that faint but persistent feeling of being watched from the darkness, that feeling that sends a chill down your spine. It is the possibility of what is hidden out of sight that is unsettling. The darkness acts as a catalyst, one that allows us to create our own horrors where none really exist. But as we get older and we experience the dark night after night, we start to think more rationally about things. Eventually we realize that there was really nothing there, until at some point we stop imagining things there entirely. But I would be lying if I said I still don't get the sensation of eyes on me in the dark sometimes. Darkness in the ocean is different than it is on land. Images of the deep are far more unsettling than ones of a dark room or a house. The feelings that they invoke are magnified. Darkness is deeper, its presence seems heavier, the possibilities hidden within it seem expanded. We cannot know the ocean, not in the same way that we can a room or a house, or even a natural space like the woods. It's not something we can experience, somewhere we can go and investigate for ourselves. We can't know normal in the deep ocean in the same way we can someplace on land. We know rationally that there is no monster hiding in the dark or at the bottom of that rickety basement staircase, but the same can't be said for the ocean. The blackness of the deep ocean is a darkness that can only be compared to subterranean caves. It's a kind of darkness that most people will never experience. This incredible darkness and the mind-boggling size of the ocean makes it easy to suspend disbelief. On land, stories of monsters are just stories, but in water they become possibilities. There very well could be some colossal predator churning in the darkness, or some twisted alien-looking sea creature swimming just out of view. The unknown of the ocean acts like a blank canvas, one that allows us to populate the inky blackness of the abyss with our own monsters, ones of all shape and size hidden away in the vastness of the sea. And the ocean is vast. The word hardly does it justice. It's the single largest continuous feature on Earth. It is so huge that it is impossible for us to truly gain a grasp on its scale. If you imagine something like a house, though the details will vary from person to person, you will still have a general understanding of the scale of whatever home you're imagining, because you have a frame of reference from your own lived experiences. This isn't something that is possible with the ocean. There isn't anything that we interact with in our everyday lives that is comparable in scale. If you were to go out on a boat into the middle of the Pacific Ocean until you were hundreds of miles away from land in either direction, with nothing in sight but the rippling of waves from one horizon to the other, you wouldn't even be seeing a percent of a percent of a percent of the Pacific's total width. It's not something that can be experienced by a single person in its entirety, only in small sections that are limited by our own senses. The ocean is isolating in its vastness, remote in a way that goes beyond anything that can be experienced on land. Point Nemo is without a doubt the most isolated place on Earth. It is a pole of inaccessibility, points that are measured by their remoteness or distance from other geographic features. For example, the land pole of inaccessibility, the furthest point on Earth away from water, is in western China near the border of Kazakhstan. There are several other poles of inaccessibility, one for each continent and ocean. But Point Nemo is the most remote of them all. This spot in the middle of the southern Pacific Ocean is the furthest you can get away from civilization without leaving the planet. It's so remote that the closest people aren't even on Earth. They're up in orbit aboard the International Space Station. Being in the middle of the ocean is as close as you can get to being surrounded by nothing without being in the vacuum of space, where one can well and truly be stranded in a way that just isn't possible anywhere else. This capacity for isolation, the ease in which people or entire ships can disappear without a trace, helps to foster a kind of mysticism around the ocean, making it just that little bit easier to attribute the unknown to the supernatural. Probably the most well-known case of this is the idea of ghost ships, vessels that are found adrift after having been abandoned by their crews, most of the time without any clear reason, left to linger on as empty husks until they wash ashore or cross paths with another ship out in the open ocean. The experience of those who find these ships, especially out in open ocean, must be both confusing and terrifying. On August 29, 1884, the crew of the HMS Mallard of the British Royal Navy spotted the HMS Resolven drifting in the waters off the northern coast of Newfoundland. After seeing no sign of the crew, they boarded the vessel and were met with a confusing sight. No one was aboard and the ship's lifeboat had been launched, but the sailors of the Mallard couldn't find a good reason why the Resolven's crew had abandoned it. Beyond some very superficial damage to the merchant brig's hull, it was in perfect condition. The crew had left behind their belongings as well as their cargo, and a fire still burned in the galley. The ship's oil lamps also remained lit. When the party checked the ship's logbook, they found that the Resolven had set out from port less than 2 days prior, the last entry being just 6 hours before the ship had been sighted by the Mallard. The Mallard encountered a small iceberg in the area, leading to speculations that the Resolven's crew had abandoned ship after an ice strike, not having the experience to know that the damage was minor. The Mallard had spent some time searching the surrounding area for the departed crew, but found no trace of them or their lifeboat. Despite the popular depiction of ghost ships as wooden vessels of rigging and sail, encounters with these ships aren't just stories from the far past. A more recent example is the case of the Kaz II, a small catamaran which was found adrift off the coast of northern Australia in April of 2007. When maritime officials boarded the Kaz, they found it in a strange state. No one was aboard and the engine was still idling. A laptop was open and still powered on, and on the boat's dining table a meal was set out and ready to be eaten. The Kaz hadn't suffered any damage aside from one of its sails being damaged, likely after having gone adrift. The onboard radio was still in good condition, as were the rest of the onboard electronics. The lifeboat hadn't been launched, nor were any of the life jackets used. It was as if the 3 passengers had simply vanished. A later investigation concluded that the Kaz had likely gone adrift on the 15th, not long after setting out from Marl Beach, and according to GPS data, the Kaz was heading towards moderately rough seas around that afternoon. Footage from a camera on board showed the 3 passengers, Derek Batten and Peter and James Tunstead, fishing without life jackets. The best guess of investigators is that they fell overboard once they reached rougher water, but how exactly this would have happened in such a way that they went over at the same time, while also leaving the boat more or less pristine, is unknown. Ghost ships are unsettling to me not just due to the thought of what made these people abandon ship in the first place, but also due to the fact that when they choose to do so, they are basically choosing doom. It is hard to imagine the position that these people found themselves in, where abandoning ship out of sight of land and with miles of water beneath them seemed like their best option. Such a situation must have seemed almost entirely helpless. The average depth of the ocean is 3,682 meters, or just a little over 2 miles of nothing but water from surface to sea floor. While the thought of being in so much water is bad enough, it is something that is made even worse by the fact that most of the ocean exists in darkness. Sunlight only penetrates around 650 feet into water, meaning that the vast majority of the ocean, almost 90% of it, is pitch black. The ocean is full of titanic geological structures that dwarf anything on the surface, mountains that far outstrip Everest in height, and underwater trenches double the depth of the deepest canyon on land, which at its deepest descends a mind-boggling 19,714 feet into the earth. At its deepest, at the southern tip of the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep is nearly 36,000 feet below sea level, almost 7 miles from surface to the bottom of the trench. 7 miles of nothing but water, building up to pressures over 1,000 times what we experience here on the surface. I find these and other megastructures of the ocean disturbing, not just due to their sheer size, and I can't deny that there is some aspect of megalophobia at play here, but it's also due to the fact that they exist in near total darkness. Due to the nature of water and their immense size, these monuments can only be experienced in small segments, in the slowly fading light from the sea's surface before it disappears entirely, or in a thin beam of light from some small submersible cutting through the darkness. The fact that things so massive can be hidden away in the murk of the ocean, totally unseen until they fade in from the abyss, makes it hard not to wonder if there isn't life that is equally as colossal, lurking in underwater canyons or in the shadows of submerged mountains. There are not a lot of photos of the deep ocean, and for those that do exist, there's a kind of surrealness to them, a haunting stillness that hangs over them and their alien subjects. Looking at one can feel a lot like looking through a window to another world, one that might as well be entirely alien. The creatures that call the deep sea home don't seem comparable to their shallow water counterparts. The incredible pressures and lack of light makes life there take shapes that are almost unrecognizable. There are countless alien and strange creatures that inhabit the abyssal parts of the ocean. Finless sharks, translucent fish, predators that entice prey with lures of light in the darkness. Things that have evolved without eyes to live in a world that has never known light. They are mysterious in a way, in part to the general strangeness of them, but also in that their very environment keeps us from understanding them. Aside from the rare sighting on the occasional deep-sea expedition, much of our exposure to the life of the deep is when, for one reason or another, they end up on the surface. When these creatures are brought to the surface, where their bodies are deformed from being forced out of the incredible pressures that they are adapted for, it makes animals that look relatively normal in the deep transform into horribly deformed caricatures of themselves. This, and the fact that we almost exclusively see them after they have died, helps to understand why people drew up stories of sea monsters. Another element to the unsettling nature of the deep ocean is something called abyssal gigantism. It is a phenomenon where species that live in the extreme deep grow much larger than their shallow water counterparts. Probably the most well-known case of abyssal gigantism is the colossal squid. They can grow to an insane 30 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds, but most upsetting is that we just don't know how large they can get. Most upper estimates are based on beak fragments found in the stomach of sperm whales, but those are just guesses in the end. And it wasn't until 2025 that scientists were even able to spot a live colossal squid in its natural habitat, and that was just a juvenile. Deep-sea gigantism, much like many other aspects of the deep, is something that we don't really understand, and we don't have a real explanation for why it happens either. There are a few theories, of course, that things like immense pressure or less predation or higher levels of oxygen in certain parts of the deep have allowed the animals that live there to grow much larger than they otherwise would have. Simply knowing that there are these huge creatures in the abyssal parts of the ocean makes it hard not to wonder what other hulking things are lurking in the darkness that we don't know about. Much of the deep sea is a mystery to us, one that we only occasionally gain small glimpses into. But many times these themselves aren't perfect. The immense pressure of the deepest parts of the ocean mean that it's nearly impossible for us to study any of the life there. And in that regard, we've only really scratched the surface. We have, to some degree, been learning about our own environment of dry land for as long as we have existed, just by virtue of it being where we live. But we've only been learning and investigating the deep sea for, at best, a few hundred years. And it wasn't until the 1930s that people saw for the first time with their own eyes what the darkness of the ocean held. In August of 1934, Otis Barton and naturalist William Beebe conducted the first ever real deep-sea dive with the aim of investigating life. The dive was conducted using a bathysphere which was designed by Barton, which operated as a small round metal submersible that had its depth controlled by a winch on a surface vessel and was unable to move on its own. It was not all that different from an anchor that people could climb inside of, Barton and Beebe dove repeatedly off the coast of Bermuda, diving again and again until they reached a depth of 3,000 feet below the surface. The bathysphere was cramped, with barely enough room to fit the two men and all their scientific equipment inside of it. The interior compartment of the bathysphere was unheated, and condensation had a habit of pooling at the top of it, before later raining down on the pair and their equipment. The bathysphere was sealed from the outside, its hatch riveted shut. And while submerged, the pair's only connection to the outside world was a collection of small portholes and a cable connected to their carrier ship. Over the course of the expedition, Beebe kept a record of observations and notes of what he had seen through the small porthole. Barton and Beebe were the first to ever experience the true darkness of the ocean, with Beebe describing the deep as, quote, black, very black, black as hell. During their dives, the pair encountered a variety of new species, some that have been encountered afterwards, and many that have never been seen again. Most are only preserved in sketches based off of their notes, and to say that these depictions of deep-sea life that Beebe saw are unnerving is an understatement. They make me feel like I'm looking through a window into another world. These animals seem to fit more in the waters of other planets than those of our own. I can easily imagine them swimming in the vast oceans beneath the icy surface of Jupiter's moons, but to place them here on Earth feels odd. It's a feeling that is only made worse by the fact that many of these creatures have never been seen again in the near century since Beebe recorded seeing them in the first place. Looking at these drawings fills me with an odd sensation, the same kind that I get when looking at more modern pictures of deep-sea life. To see things that for almost all of human history had not been seen by a single person is a surreal feeling, one that makes me feel like I shouldn't be looking at all. It's the same kind of sensation that images of space give me, a tingling that crawls up my spine telling me that what I'm witnessing is not something that should be possible. The deep ocean in a lot of ways reminds me of space, at least in the way that they both make me feel. They are both totally different from the world in which we live our everyday lives in. The ocean, like space, is a place that we know very little about. They are both difficult to reach and to explore, but not so much that we can't do so at all. They exist in the perfect space between the two to drive us to explore them, regardless of how difficult actually doing so is. And to some extent, the ocean is even harder to explore than space. We probably know more about our solar system than we do the deepest parts of our ocean. We mapped the surface of other planets like Mars, Venus, and Mercury before mapping out our own oceans. More man-made objects have left our solar system than have reached the deepest part of our ocean, the Challenger Deep. This picture of Pluto was taken by NASA's New Horizons mission in 2015, 4 years before the current deepest dive was made. The ocean has maintained its mystery through its sheer vastness and difficulty of exploration. In a way, it is our world's last great unknown. But for all the mystery of the ocean, and that small part of me which desperately wants to cite the paranormal and fantastical as reasons for the unknown, many of the unknowns of the ocean are not unexplainable. Stories of sea monsters like the kraken or sea serpents were likely rooted in sightings of colossal squids or oarfish, which, while unnerving in their own right, especially when imagining that these stories were based on bodies that had washed ashore, they certainly aren't proof of monsters, just animals. Similarly, many unexplained underwater signals like the bloop detected by NOAA are likely just the result of plate tectonics or oceanic volcanism. Regardless of how much we might want the cause to be some unknown huge creature lurking in the darkness, the probable answers for the unexplained are mundane. Just like there was no man in the darkness when I was a child, there probably isn't a leviathan hidden in the deep. Of course, that won't stop me from questioning if that's true the next time I step into the ocean. Thanks for watching. Until next time.